And thank you very much for joining us here on PM Express. And as you know, we are less than 6 months away to the December 7 elections. And we've been focusing quite a bit on the NDC and the MPP. Tonight, I want to pause for a second and focus on the potential third force. So we have many third force contenders. But it's a question that we've asked over the years, since 1992, when we've had other political parties other than the MPP and the NDC attempting to break their front. Is it really a monumental waste of time, or is it not? This year, many say the environment is quite different and that it is ripe for a third force to step in and cause a significant damage to the fortunes of both the MPP or the NDC in this particular race. Is it really the case? We'll attempt to answer that question scientifically tonight on the touch screen behind me. But which political parties, movements, independent candidates are making waves when it comes to the potential third force? A few of them. We know one is the Yellow Ghana, and they received their temporal license from the Electoral Commission just a few days back, and they're already making waves. The thing that strikes me when I look at them is obviously the color that they've chosen, which is yellow. And as you know by now, yellow is a color that the setting Alan Chamanting also uses in his own campaign and his own political party, the butterfly movement, as you know by now. And so many are raising a few more questions about that. When we said we'll try and clarify all that for you. But then there's also the New Vision movement. A man I've spoken to on Ghana Connect a few times, and indeed, there was a time when he was very, very famous because he stood up and challenged a minister of state when he made comments about the diaspora that he really objected to. And he attempted the last time to run. He didn't quite succeed in doing so because of the questions that were raised about his own ability to mobilize and to sign signatures, etc., that the Electoral Commission raised. So we'll ask him about that as he attempts once more to come back, this time hoping that he'll be cleared by the Electoral Commission to run in this year's elections. We also have seen the new force. As you know, Cheddar, Freedom Jacob Caesar, or the Nakwame Bediako, who has many names. And he came first with the man the mask. Now he's unveiled that, and he is in the reckoning very strongly. He's spending a lot of money touring the country. Very visible when you drive across the length and breadth of this country. His billboards are everywhere. And we'll talk about what the polls say. The polls say he's doing very, very well together with Alan Chamanting, and who, as you know, has come in with the movement for change. And that, again, is one of the key players this year that many say may cause an upset or can actually become the kingmaker. But will all of them together cause a significant upset, or will one emerge as a potential proper third force? We've been craving this third force concept for a long time, for decades. Nobody has come close to delivering that punch that would make a significant dent in the fortunes of both the MPP and the NDC. So really, what does the evidence tell us? The evidence tells us that if you look at the elections since 1996 to date, put all the votes of the minority political parties together, the votes of all parties, independent candidates, call them what you may, who are not the NDC or the MP, if you put all the votes together, they only come down to 1.72 million votes. That is a tiny drop in the mighty ocean of all the votes that are available to campaign for and to get an election. All the elections, 1996 to 2020. So that immediately tells you they are up against it in attempting to do something different this year. Now, let's put this in context. In the 2020 elections, the NDC and the MPP were all in the region of 6 million votes thereabout. So the votes for just one election cycle, for the party that lost the elections, I'm talking about the NDC, this 1.72 million votes that you see is a quarter of what the NDC managed to get in just one election, right? And you're talking about all the elections combined together. And I'm just putting out the facts so we can put this in context. And they must do something really different. Has the environment really changed to warrant a third force this year, or to create the foundations and the fertile ground for a third force to emerge that will then unseat knock the NDC or the MPP off their perch. This evidence says they are really up against it. That's not all. If you break this down in the trends behind, we'll look at the trend line and what it's showing. But if you break it down into this 1.72 million votes, if you break this down into actual votes over the elections that I've specifically talked about, the only time that they managed anything, all the parties together, all the minority political parties together, including the independent candidates and the movements, call them what you may, the only time they really managed anything significant was very close to just 500,000 votes. And that was in 2008. And you see that there in 2000, that's the year that they forced the election for the very first time in electoral history to a runoff, in 2000. And that specifically was 473,000 votes. The next time they did that, again, in terms of the number of votes that they get, that managed again to push this into a runoff, was in 2008. Now, if you look at that, that's the third highest number of votes that all the minority political parties have gathered together, have managed to make together in an election. The first is in 2000, there was a runoff. The third highest votes is in 2008, 248,000 votes. Again, there was a runoff. So the argument goes that the best they can hope for is to become a kingmaker. In other words, they can cause these elections to go into runoff. And many will look at the history to say, again, this year, we are primed possibly for a runoff. And the parties other than the NDC and MPP can cause this to happen. As the evidence shows there, if we take away 2004 from this equation, in the 2 years that they have the most votes, all the parties together, they push into runoff. But I keep emphasizing all together. Not a single one of them have managed to, by themselves, cause a dent or cause a significant ripple in the fortunes of the two main political parties. And that's what you see there. The NDC, the MPP, they are dominant indeed. If you look at the last year's elections, all the other parties together just 1.32%. So again, we're just looking at the facts, and I'm pretty sure some of them have looked at the facts. You need to look at this first and then decide what strategy are you going to adopt and how do you change this narrative. You go to the runoff elections. These are the runoff elections, and this is the first one we looked at, right? In 2000, 2008, which is what I was talking about. These are the hard numbers. MPP in 2000 had 48, NDC had 44. But if you look at all the parties together, that is 6.7%. That's the most they've managed to get, right? And so they pushed it. The third highest is when you look at the 2000 elections, which is what I mentioned earlier. But this, for me, is a trend line. And I want to show you that line if you may not notice. And this is a line I'm talking about here. This red line here is a trend line we drew. And that trend line tells us a story. That whereas the NDC and the MPP are growing in strength to strength, the minority political parties, other than the NDC and MPP themselves, independent candidates, throw them in there, they are weakening in strength. In terms of, if you measure that by votes, they are weakening in strength over the years. This pure facts. And the numbers there tell us its own story. So the NDC and MPP, they are growing in strength. They're getting more numbers. But if you are a minority political party, if you're an independent candidate, these are your fortunes, as this trend tells us. And this trend is downward. And so the projection is that you expect this to dip even further in the 2024 elections. But trends are only meant to be defied, right? If the circumstances are right, something might change this year that may cause this to start climbing back up. But how significantly can they climb from where they are now to becoming the dominant in our electoral political affairs? So that, for me, this graph here tells a very important story for the minority political parties. And just note what is happening. NDCs, MPP, they are growing. The smaller political parties, they are in decline, as that graph tells you. And then you focus on the runoff also. The runoff tells you, just focus on this and focus on that for a second. What you see happen here is the last time they really did anything significant was in 2000, as I've said already. And you look at the other time they did anything significant in 2008, but in 2004 was also quite significant. Nothing happened because it was in the middle of John Kufuor's term, right? These are all pure numbers that the parties are looking at. But I like this particular graph because that tells you the story per party. The third force, as we've seen over the period, the best third force we've had is actually the PNC's candidate in Edward Mahama. And when I saw that, I was curious. I'm like, I thought it was Papa Kwesi Indum, but the facts are the facts. If you look at that, he got 3%. Nobody else has managed anything close. Nobody else. And that is interesting indeed. And he was on the strength of a party that is very established in our political affairs. That party has dwindled by its own fortunes over time, and that was 1996, 3%. Since then, which is why the graph has been trending downwards, nobody has come close. Even Papa Kwesi Indum, that many people thought was strong, only had a showing in 2008 of 1.32%. So anybody's going to be hoping to do more than 3%. One third force. Can they be in that position? And let's put this in context. Alan Kyerematen is a force to be reckoned with. He's broke away from the party. But we had breakaways before. And when they break away and form their parties, the evidence show they don't do as well. I'll come to that. And this, for me, is a thing. There's a breakaway story, right? So many say, oh, Alan Kyerematen is the one who can cause... The history doesn't tell us that. In politics, you look to history. J.A. Kufuor, John Mills. In that year, Gusitano broke away from the NDC and only had 1.2%. Charles Nkrumah broke away from the MPP, only had 0.3%. So again, that tells you, the fact that you break away doesn't necessarily mean, no matter how popular you are, and Rakubebe with them was very popular. Guzi was very, very popular indeed. It doesn't mean that you can take away from the two main parties. They are so dominant, and as the evidence shows, they've only grown bigger, larger, more influential, getting more votes, while the other parties and independent candidates have been dwindling. That's the evidence. And then you look at Emmanuel Ansah entry, DFP. The DFP story is quite fascinating into the 2008 elections. Why? Because you had Obeda Sama, who was a national chairman of the NDC, breakaway. We have Big Zedin, who was an acting general secretary, the deputy general secretary, breakaway. Francis Essien broke away. They formed this party. And you thought, goodness me, the NDC is finished. In fact, also Obeda Sama, who actually once predicted the demise of the NDC. As it turned out in that elections in 2008, what happened? They won the elections in the second round, in spite of that breakaway that many people thought was going to tear the NDC to shreds, right? So that's another one. And then you look at another election in 2016, again, we had Nanakunde Juma Rawlings breaking away. So don't necessarily hype and exaggerate the potential impact of Alan Kyerematen just yet, because the evidence shows that when you break away, it's not necessarily the case that you can show and you can punch above your weight. And then this, by the way, is what the polls are telling us, that in this year's election, and this, by the way, is according to Global Info Analytics, in this year's election, this is what they hope to make altogether, 11.60%. If that is the case, that will be the highest they've managed to put together if you put their strengths all in one, right? But I said, if this is what is going to happen, then there's possibly something happening this year. In our body politic, in people's disillusionment with the established forces, the two main parties, that may potentially hand one of them an advantage against the NDC or the MPP. And I want to really ask them when we sit down if they've appreciated this and what is it that will play to their strength this year, considering that they're coming up against history in this year's elections. And just look at what the polls say. The polls actually tell us, according to Global Info Analytics, that it is Alan who may manage only some 7.40%, and then close to him will be Nana Bediako Sheda with 2.3%, thereabout, right? So that gap here is significant, right? But this man, who just got into the race and threw in a lot of resources at it, seems to be doing quite well. And then you have the rest who are in there. You have Samuel Dankwa, and then you have Sam Ankra, who Global Info Analytics says is just managing just 0%. Thankfully, he's here. And polls are polls. Even in the US, polls got it horribly wrong when they said that Donald Trump was going to lose. And so it is as what it is. You take it as you find it. We'll see what his own polls are telling him. Because if you are in a race, you must be doing your own polling. You must be researching. So you must know what is it that the ground is telling you there. So let's have the conversation. That is the evidence. I will put that evidence to them. And let's hear what their answers are. I'm pretty sure if they're hearing me for the first time, they may have already done analysis. I'm not sure that they're seeing this for the first time. The team will be poring over this data. Now, elections is all about data, all about data. You don't just go in blind. You have to guide what you're doing with data. They've seen this before. I'm pretty sure. If they haven't, I'll be very surprised. But when I sit down, I'll put it to them and hear the answers. Please stay with me.